Hey everybody. I'm just coming on today just to give you words of encouragement. As I allow Facebook to draw me in the audience, I'm going to ask those of you who's under the sound of my voice to go ahead and tag some people in and let them know that I'm on. Share the video, like, love the video out, and comment. Feel free to comment. Let me know how your day was. While I am tagging people in and sharing the video out, I just want to let you all know that God is still faithful, and He's still working things out on our behalf. So I just want to encourage you all with that. As I said, I'm gonna go ahead and as I'm speaking with you all, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna share this video out. And I would ask you to do the same, please, to just go ahead and share the video out and let people know that I am on tonight. As I promised you, I was going to come back and I was going to talk about Samuel and Saul, when Samuel was sent by God to go anoint a king in Jesse's house, which is David, the same David we know as the shepherd boy and boy that knocked down the giant. So that's what I'm going to talk about on tonight. Um, I appreciate each and every person that's under the sound of my voice, that's here with me. I'm just going to let Facebook draw me an audience in on tonight. As I begin to more people come on the live, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll start it. As always, you can always go back and watch the replay. So the replay will be available for you to go back and to watch the replay. I pray that each and every person had a wonderful day on today. I mean, we get nice weather, y'all, so we could tell that the summertime is actually creeping in. So that's a blessing that, we are starting to see summer come on in. So get a chance to get out there and enjoy some of the weather. Get a chance to get out there and not be so cooped up in the house. Jeffrey Garnett, thank you so much for joining in with me on tonight. I appreciate you so much for joining in with this on this podcast with us. It's truly a blessing each time I see you on here. So I do want to go ahead and just thank you for joining the podcast. Jeffrey, I'm just trying to let Facebook draw me in the audience before I go ahead and get started. But I was just talking about how we are having good weather. So that's another good thing, that the weather is pretty good. So we won't have to stay in the house so much. We'll be able to at least get out and go in the yard. Charlene, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much on tonight for joining in with me on tonight. I'm just trying to let Facebook indicate to others that I am on tonight before I give this message. I think this message is going to be it's going to be a pretty good message, and it's going to help us kind of understand the Bible more and how God did things and how the things that God did in the Bible, how it relates to our lives. So I appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I'm just letting Facebook indicate to others that I'm on tonight before I get started, and then I'll jump into this message. As I was saying, I pray that each and every person had a blessed day on today. I was just speaking of the weather being pretty nice, and how we are getting good weather, so we don't have to stay so bottled up in the house. We also have a YouTube channel where you can go over there on YouTube and you can join us on YouTube under Real Talk with Frank and Vanessa on YouTube. So that's also another option for you. If you want to watch it on YouTube, because everybody doesn't watch on Facebook. So that's an option that you have. The book that I'm going to be coming out of is going to be First Samuel chapter 16. Nicole Collins, good evening. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for joining in with me on this live on tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The book that I'm going to be coming out of is First Samuel. And to kind of give you just a little background of what I'm going to be talking about is how sometimes we hold on as long as we can. And sometimes w- by us holding on, we don't want to let go of certain situations, and we don't let want to let go of certain things and of certain people. But God has to tell us, you've spent enough time there. He has to tell us that it's time to let go because you've been holding on as long as you can. And sometimes we don't even realize that we've held on for a very long time before God has to tell us, let go. And as I was studying this on tonight, and God was showing me how letting go is not always the easiest task that we can do in our life. I mean, it could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be a friendship, it could be a house, it could be a car, it could be whatever we're holding on to. Only us as a person knows what it is that we've been holding on to for so long and what we need to let go. Um, you have to do what you have to do. Sometimes God has to separate those who can see but can't see the vision of where God is actually taking you to. I was as I was going over this story, I began to look at holding on. Have you ever thought about, sometimes it's like the tug of war? You got one end and somebody else got the other end. And you're actually in a tug of war where you're pulling back and forth. And if nobody never lets go, you'll be in that tug of war forever. Thank you, Tasha. Yep. She says addition by subtraction. Yep. Thank you, Tasha, for joining in with us on tonight. Um, so it's like tug of war. And it's like you got two people, one is holding one end and another person is holding the other end. And if nobody never lets go, do you realize you'll be holding on as long as you can until finally you say to yourself, I got to let it go. Or finally God says, enough is enough. He says, you've held on to this situation. You've held on to this person. You held on to this job. You've held on to this house. You held on to this car as long as you can. God's saying, I'm releasing you. And as I begin to look at this, I found that so powerful. Tess, thank you so much for joining in. That sometimes God has to say, enough is enough. Let it go. God says, you've held on for so long. Now it's time for a release. What do I mean? Unless you let it go, God can't release you from anything that you keep holding on to. And so as I began to look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, it's hard to let go. God is saying, embrace what's next. He says, you can't get what I have for you if you don't embrace what's next. So God is saying, I want you to let go and just embrace what's next. God is saying, I'm trying to do a new thing in your life, and the old thing you have to let go. You know, the Bible says old things pass away. God says, I'm about to release you from all those old things. He says, but I want you to embrace what's next. He says, so that you can get to the new thing. He says, let go of what used to be. Catch that. He says, let go of what used to be. He says, because what used to be is no longer going to exist once you let it go. You know, you can say all the time, I used to have this kind of car, or I used to have this kind of house. But once that's gone, You have to let go of what used to be and embrace what God is doing in your life. So God had begun to say, he says, you've held on as long as you can. He says, now you just got to let it go. So I'm coming from 1 Samuel 16, and it's talking about when Samuel anointed David. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So Samuel got rejected. Samuel was a king, and God rejected him. He rejected he rejected Saul because of Saul's disobedience. God had told Samuel something specific to do. He told him to go and to fight. It was different tribes that he had to fight. And he told Samuel specific things to do that Samuel didn't do. Samuel felt like him being obedient, that his sacrifice was better than his obedience, because he felt like doing half of what God had called him to do was going to please God. So what happens is, it says, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul? So what happened was, Saul was the king, and Samuel was disappointed. So he kind of felt bad about Saul being rejected. So what he did was, he was in a mourning period. And God had to ask him, how long are you going to mourn for Saul? He says, since I have rejected him as king over Israel. He says, you have to let go of what I've already rejected. So I'm going to stop there. God is saying, I rejected Saul as king. Miss Gwen, thank you so much for joining in with me on tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you. Love you too. God has rejected Samuel as a king, as Saul as a king, but Samuel is in mourning. What happens when God has rejected something in your life and God is telling you there's nothing you can do about it? Relia, thank you so much for joining in with me. There's nothing you can do about it. So God asks the question. He says to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul? I have rejected him as king over Israel. So God is telling him, he says, listen, he says, you've been holding on to Samuel long enough. He says, I've allowed you your time and I've allowed you your space to mourn over Saul. Now remember, Saul has not passed away. It's just the fact that God says, I reject him as being king over Israel. So God says, I've allowed you time, I've allowed you space, Samuel, to mourn about Saul being rejected. He says, but you've held on as long as you can. Now you might as well let go. You gotta let go. God says, you don't even have a choice. Saul is rejected. I've rejected him. What happens when God rejects something for your life and you don't let go? God says, I'm going to let you know that you can't hold on anymore. You got to let go. So what happens is, as I look in the Bible, you ask the question, why did Samuel mourn over Saul when Saul was still alive? Well, Samuel was so connected to Saul that he felt like God rejecting Saul was a rejection to him. Catch that. Samuel felt like if God rejected Saul, then God was rejecting him because he was connected to Saul. It's just like we have people in our life and God can reject that person from our life. But because we care so much and because we kind of feel bad because God is rejecting them, we feel like somewhere along the way we've been rejected also. God is saying that's not the case. He says, what I'm doing is, remember, I talked about that tug of war. You've been holding on to the end of that rope for so long. There's a Samuel at one end of the rope, and then you got Saul at the other end of the rope. God says Saul is not going any further. You got to let the rope go because I've already rejected Saul. Stop holding on to that end of the rope. You got to let it go. God says, you've held on as long as you can. He says, now I want you to just move on. So as I begin to look at this story, he says, listen, he says, you got to let him go. He says, I rejected him. Not because of what you done. I rejected him because of what he did. He disobeyed me. He didn't do what I asked him to do. He felt like his sacrifice was better than his obedience. God saying there's nothing you can do to change my mind about Samuel, but I need you to move on. So as I began to look at this story, so God tells him, he says, how long will you mourn for Samuel? He says, I've rejected him as king over Israel. He says, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. God says, now we've dealt with the fact that Saul has been rejected. He says, what I want you to do is, he says, you get up right now. He says, you've held on long enough. I want you to drop the end of the rope that you've been holding on to. He says, I want you to get up right now. What happens when God tells you, you got to leave this situation. You got to leave this job. You got to leave this relationship. You got to leave this home. You got to leave this car. What happens when God tells you, let it go and move on? So what God says is, he says, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. Now, God is telling him, God says, listen, I got work for you to do. He says, I want you, because I've chosen another king. He says, I want you to go to Jesse's house. He says, but I want you to fill your horn with oil. See, God is saying, I need you to post some oil somewhere, because I'm about to anoint somebody. See, you don't realize that if sometimes you letting go of the thing that God is telling you you've held on to long enough, God is saying, I'm about to bless you, but I'm allow you to bless somebody else. But if you keep holding on to something that has already been rejected, there's no way you can do what I asked you. So he says, move on. He says, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to a whole nother place. He says, I have chosen one of his sons to be king. Now, you know, Jesse is David's father. He had 7 sons. So what God began to tell Samuel, somewhere in Jesse's house, out of the 7 boys that's in the house, there's a king there. He says, I can't deal with Saul. Saul is no longer gonna be a king. He says, I'm sending you to anoint the king in Jesse's house. He says, but so move on. So as I begin to look at this, he says, but Samuel said, how can I go? So now fear has set in. Because he says, if Saul hears about it, he'll kill me. So what happens is you feel like the person or the place or the thing that you've held on to, you feel like that you can't live without it. If you leave the place, the person, the thing, you feel like you won't make it. So now you asking God, how can I go? How can I leave this behind? How can I just pick up everything that I have? I understand that you're saying that I need to fill my horn with oil because I have to go and I have to anoint another king, but I can't let go of the king that I'm used to. What happens when you so used to one king and God is telling you that's not the king anymore? I'm about to give you something new. What happens when God said this job just ain't beneficial to you no more? What happens when God is saying, I'm about to give you a new job, but you keep saying, God, I've been here for so long. This is what God is saying. You've been holding on as long as you can. God is saying, let it go and move on. So Samuel asks the question. He says, how can I go? He says, if Saul hears about it, he'll kill me. Fear sets in. I know it gets scary when God tells you to do something new. Tasha, thank you for joining in. I know it gets scary when God tells you to do something new because you've been in the same place for so long that doing something new feels uncomfortable to you. But what happens when God is saying you can't stay in this place because I've already rejected that king? I need you to go into Jesse's house and anoint the new king. What happens when fear sets in and God is telling you, you have to move on and do what I asked you? God is saying, don't feel like letting go is going to kill you. God says, because you got to remember the word to move on came from God and not from man. So what happens is the Lord says, so he gives them specific instructions on how to move on. He says, the Lord says, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. So God says, it's somebody new about to come on the scene. God says, it's something new that I'm trying to get to you. He says, so what I want you to do is, he says, stop being afraid. He says, if you walk away from the person you've been holding on to for so long, God said, I promise you, it's not going to kill you. See, we got to realize faith and fear don't operate in the same capacity. God says you scared to move because you feel like you can't live without Saul. God's saying, if I tell you Saul has been rejected, even if you stay with your Saul, whether it's your job, your house, your car, your relationship, your friendship, whatever it is that you steady holding on to that end of the rope, God said it's not going to benefit your life because I've already rejected it. Anything that God has been rejected, nothing good is coming out of it. So God says, what I want you to do is, he says, invite Jesse to the sacrifice. You're about to go to another level. God says, take the oil with you. So God tells you to take the oil with you because you're about to go to another level. He says, and what I want you to do is, he says, I will show you what to do. See, God says, I'm not sending you to Jesse's house clueless. He says, I've already instructed you that you need some oil. He says, and when you get to Jesse's house, he says, I will show you what to do. He says, you are to anoint for me the one that I indicate. So what God is saying, I'm not sending you to this job and you don't understand what to do. I'm not sending you to get pre-approved for a house and you don't understand what to do. I'm not sending you to open up the business and you don't understand what to do. God says, if I send you, I'm going to indicate to you just what to do. God says, but I can't tell you everything right now because I got to make sure you know who I want to be the king. So as God begin to tell him, he says, I'll show you the one that I'll indicate to you, the one that's to be king. So I'm going to fast forward it. So now Samuel gets up and he invites Jesse to the sacrifice. He tells Jesse, he says, there's a king in the house. Now, check this out. Stop underestimating yourself because you've held on and stayed in a place for a long time and you felt like if you dropped the rope that you wouldn't be able to make it. Stop underestimating yourself because you felt like I've been with that person for so long that if I drop the relationship, I won't be able to make it. Stop underestimating yourself because you said, I've been staying in this apartment for so long. There's no way that God will want me to get a house. God says, stop underestimating yourself. He says, all you need to do is fill up your horn and take the oil. God says, I will indicate to you just what I want you to do once you get there. See, God says, I can't tell you everything because if I tell you everything, you'll feel like you familiar with my plan. God says, what I want you to do, he says, I want you to allow me to order your steps. He says, the first thing you do is let go. So he says, now that I got you to let go, I need you to go somewhere, because where I'm sending you to, there's a blessing in store. So he tells Samuel, Samuel did just that. And so Samuel gets to the house. He says, I come in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. So he's telling Jesse, he says, listen, he says, there's a king in your house. He says, and I've come to anoint the king. But you know what the crazy part about it? What you looking for ain't what you think it's going to be. Because sometimes we get so comfortable with looking for what we're familiar with. I'm going to show y'all. So as Samuel gets to the house, it says when they arrive, it says Samuel saw Eliab, which is one of the sons. There were 7 sons. Catch that. There were 7 sons. And he thought, surely the Lord anointed stands here before the Lord. So what he thought is, he sees the first son. And the reason why he thinks the first son is the one, Latanya, thank you so much for joining in. The reason why he thinks that the first son is the one that God has picked is because he says, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord anointed stands here before the Lord. So what he says is, this got to be the one. And what God says is, he had to me, Samuel, everybody looked the same to you. He says, you think Eliab is the one that I want because he looks like Saul to you. God is saying, stop choosing the same person just because you are familiar with what you had to let go of. Y'all catch that? God told you to let go of Saul, but because Saul is so connected to your heart, you go in Jesse's house and you looking for something new, but you find yourself picking the same thing that you familiar with. So what happens is, remember God told him, he says, the oil is going to flow on the one that I have chosen. So what happens is, he says, this got to be the one. What happened when God say, you steady looking for the same thing, but you want different results? What happened when God says, you steady looking for the same jobs, but you want more pay? What happens when God says, you constantly looking for the house that resembles the apartment when I'm trying to give you an upgrade? What happens when God says, you looking for joy in the morning, but you steady staying in the place of sorrow? What happens when God says, that's not the one? So what he says is, he says, you worried about how they look. God says, I'm not choosing the person for what you see, because you're so fascinated with Saul that you can't see past Saul. What happens, y'all, when we so used to a person, a place, or a thing that we can't get the image out of our head? So when God says, I'm about to do a new thing, the new thing starts to look like the old thing, and we're ready to accept the old thing when God is saying, no, I'm doing a new thing, but it doesn't look like the old thing. So what he says is, he says, you're looking for what's familiar to you. God says, I'm not doing what's familiar to you. I'm doing something different. He says, I'm not giving you something that you comfortable with. I'm giving you something that's going to fit you. So what happens is, he says, I don't care how they look. He says, just let it go. He says, get the image out your head. He says, I'm not sending you to get the same thing 2 times. So now they're in Jesse's house. Jesse got 7 sons. So now it says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. So God tells him the first son that Samuel thought that God was going to anoint to be the king, God says, you looking at his appearance, you looking at his height, but I have rejected him. He says, that's not the one. Because to you, he looks just like what you're used to. He looks like Samuel. So you're picking the same thing that you are familiar with. So God says, no, I have rejected him. He says, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outer appearance, but I look at the heart. God is saying the reason I'm rejecting what you're familiar with is because you're looking at the outside. God says, but I'm looking at the inside, and his heart is not right. So what God tells him is, he says, listen, he says, that's not the one. So what happened when God send you somewhere and he tell you no one time? Then it says Jesse called another son, and he had him pass in front of Samuel. And it says, but Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. So now Jesse got 7 sons, and he tells him to bring another son out. God says, no, that's not the one either. That's why God is saying, don't look at yourself don't look where you come from, and don't look at yourself as small. God says, because the one that they least expected is the one that I'm looking for. God says, what I want you to do is when you let go, God says, you're going to realize God been looking for me all the time. But I've been operating off fear, and I've been stuck in one place for so long that I feel like God couldn't have been looking for me. God says, what I want you to do is, God says, just anticipate and expect to be blessed. So what he does is he goes and get the second son. God says, no, that's not the one. He goes and get the third son. God says, no, that's not the one. He goes and get the fourth son. God says, no, that's not the one. What happens? Can God tell you no more than one time, and you still expect and anticipate that God says, if I'm for you, I'm more than the world against you? If God tells you tells you no 4 times, can you still trust God that the job that God has set up for you that is out there, if God tells you a no more than 4 times, can you still trust God that the business that God says I would run, that is out there for me? So what happens is he tells him no 4 times. So he says, get another son. God says no. That's 5 times. He tells him no again 6 times. So when he tells him no 6 times, what happens is Samuel asks the question. He says to Jesse, are these all the sons you have? So God is saying, what you're looking for is not what you expect. Because you done seen 6 people that they thought was qualified for the position. You seen 6 people that they thought was qualified to get the house. You seen 6 people that they thought was qualified to be married. You seen 6 people that they thought was qualified to be blessed. But God says, ask Jesse, is this all the sons he has? So what he does, he says, are these all the sons you have? He said, there is still a youngest. Jesse answered, he is tending to the sheep. So Jesse never thought that David was even qualified to be anointed king. Now we're about to get to the good part. What happened when you, the underdog, or they say the black sheep, what happened when you're the one that's overlooked? See, sometimes in life, you better rejoice and thank God that I was overlooked by man. Because God says man can't promote you. Promotion comes from God. So God is saying, the people who overlook you, God says, I was looking for you. Y'all check that out. The people who thought you was not qualified for the job, God says, I was looking for you. The people who thought you needed a degree to run the company, God says, I was looking for you. The people who thought you wasn't qualified to get the house, God says, I was looking for you. The people who thought you wasn't qualified to be in a new relationship, God says, I was looking for you. He says, but but I didn't give them what they expected. Because what happens is Samuel is in his house. He's searching to anoint somebody to be a king. But David is back in the field. He's the shepherd boy. What happens when they don't feel like you qualified because they used to you working in the field? But God says, keep working the field because you the one that I've been looking for. God says, I'm going to send somebody. See, sometimes we be so quick to throw in the towel when God says, I haven't rejected you. He says, understand they have rejected you, but I'm going to show you that you are the one that I have been looking for. Just because they say you the underdog right now, God says, watch how you level up. Just because they say you don't have the degree, God says, watch how you do something that a person with a degree do and get paid more than the person with the degree. Just because you got a GED, God says, watch how you exceed the person with the degree. See, I'm telling you, just because you have did time in prison, God says, watch how you supersede the man or the woman who never spent time incarcerated. God says they weren't looking for you. God says that's the good thing. They looked over you when I was looking for you. God says, but when I send the right person to anoint you, everybody gonna see you. God says, I kept you in the field for a reason. You were in the field where nobody could see because they never expected a blessing to come out the field. But God is saying, listen, he says, keep doing what you're doing. He says, I don't want them to see you before. I don't want them to be the one to bless you. He says, because if they feel like they're blessing you, then you'll forget that it was God that seen me when everybody overlooked me. So what happens is God is saying, is this everybody you got? Is this all your sons? He says, you done brought 6 sons out. Ain't it funny how it could be 7 people in the room, but they only acknowledge 6. And God says, neither one of them I'm looking for. Ain't it funny how, Lakeisha Rainey, thank you so much for joining in. Ain't it funny how God says, I want you to run the business, but it's 7 people in the room and they never call your name. God said, that's because I was looking for you. They wasn't. God says, you better be glad that they wasn't looking for you. I was looking for you. So what happened was, as I began to look, it makes you ask the question. Now, Jesse had 7 kids. Why would you bring 6 of them out and fail to mention that I got 1 more? Why would you bring 6 of your kids out when Samuel was in your house looking to anoint the king that God sent him? God knew specifically where he was. But why would you step up with 6 kids and never talk about the 7th one? Why would you take 6 job applications, but you don't even consider the 7th one? Why would you have 7 people that you feel is pre-approved to get the house, but you never look at the 7th one? Why would you have 6 people that's running a business, but you never look at the 7th one that's holding things together? See, David was working that field, tending to those sheep for his father. So as I began to look, Samuel said, listen, he says, I know that there's a king in this house because God sent me here. He says, and God says, the oil was not going to flow until I see the right one. See, y'all don't realize that God is about to put some oil on your life. And God says, I know that you've been overlooked by man. God says, but you have not been overlooked by me. God says, I know that you may have been in the back of the line. God says, but I said, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. God says, I know that you've been hiding in the valley. God says, but I'm preparing a place in the presence of your enemies. God says, and then goodness and mercy will follow you. God says, I know that they didn't call your name. God says, but I wasn't concerned with them calling your name because I knew at the specific time that the oil that I got that's going to flow over your life, them calling your name ain't going to mean nothing when the oil starts to flow. So what happens is Samuel says, listen, he says, are these all the sons you have? What happened when God says, I know you got one more? But they feel like that one more is not who they looking for. So what happens is Jesse says, yeah, I do got one more. Casually, he says, yeah, but he's tending to the sheeps. So in his father's mind, I know you ain't talking about that shepherd boy back there tending to the sheep. I know you ain't looking for him. Notice I didn't even bring his name up. I didn't even bring him up. He says, I know you're not looking for that boy that's back in there tending to the sheep. What happened when God says no to you 7 times? Can I still trust God because I'm in the field working and God has said no 7 times? What happens when God says no 7 times? Will I still keep praising God 6 times? Will I still keep praising God when God has said no to me 6 times for 6 different jobs? Will I still keep praising God? Because guess what? They're overlooking me, God. God says, but keep praising me. What happens when I'm looking to expand my business and God, I'm trying to level up, but everybody keeps telling me I don't qualify for the grant. I don't qualify to run the business. I don't have enough experience. Can you keep praising God and saying, Lord, I thank you, even though I'm in the back of the warehouse right now, but thank you, God, that I see myself running the whole warehouse at this point. Can you keep praising God even when God says no 6 times? See, 6 times God had to tell you no. But what happens when God says it's your time to shine? So what happens is he says, yeah, I got a young boy. He's tending to the sheep. Samuel said, bring him here. He says, he says, we will not sit down until he arrives. What happened when God says, Samuel, you can't sit down until you bless that person? What happens when God says, you're not going nowhere until the oil flows over that person's life and they get the blessings of God? What happens when 6 times you hear no, but God says, I've been looking for you? See, sometimes it ain't easy tending to the sheeps, but it ain't all bad either. Because when God says, I'm looking for you, God says, if I have to get you out the ditch, he says, just know I was looking for you. God says, if I have to pull you out the pit, just know I was looking for you. God says, if I have to pull you out the fiery furnace, God says, just know I was looking for you. God says, if you like the woman who had the issue of blood, God says, just know I was looking for you. What happens when man rejects you 6 times and never consider you to be God's chosen one? But what happens when God says, I'm looking for you and I'm about to say yes? Y'all, as God begins to show me, he says, I'm about to say yes to a lot of people who felt like nobody was looking for them. God says, but I've always been looking for you. God says, I knew it was a specific time and there was a set place that I had to meet you at. Even if I met you in the pit, God says, I've been looking for you. God says, guess what? But the oil not going to flow until you get your blessing. See, God says, don't worry about man not seeing you. God says, I'm looking for you. So what happens is, he says, so send him. And they brought him in. They said he was glowing with health and with a fine appearance and has handsome features. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. I'm going to stop right there. God is saying, this is the one. God says, this is the one that is qualified to run this business. God said, this is the one that's qualified for this job. God said, this is the one who's qualified for this marriage. God said, this is the one who's qualified to be blessed with this house. God is saying, this is the one. I want to encourage y'all on tonight. It brought me to the story. I don't care how they look at you or how they perceive you or where you've been in your life or what you've been through. God is saying, this is the one. When everybody else overlooks you and say, this couldn't be the one that God is looking for. Never crossed my mind that God would be looking for you. But God said, no matter what you think, the oil cannot flow until they get blessed. The oil is not going to flow until they get blessed. Y'all catch that? I was looking at, and I'm going to wrap it up. I was looking at the story of Cinderella. You can't wear the shoe unless it fit. Cinderella, she had 2 stepsisters, and she wasn't the most liked one in the family. They treated Cinderella just like the stepchild. So Cinderella gets the opportunity to go to the ball. The stepmom felt like her daughters were qualified for everything. So what happens is they go to this ball, and as you all know the story of Cinderella, they made fun of her, but they just didn't know. God says, this is the one. That stepsister that's cleaning the house, this is the one. So as Cinderella goes to the ball, and it brought me back to the story, Cinderella, she goes to this ball. And what happens is she gets dressed up and she meets the prince, and she has to be out of there by 12 o'clock midnight, but Cinderella loses her shoe. So the next day they get the shoe. Y'all, I'm going somewhere. That shoe could only fit the one that the shoe was made for. As much as they talked about Cinderella and looked at her as the stepkid, didn't think she would qualify. Same thing with David. So when they got the shoe and they started to go around, they went to Cinderella's door. God says, you are the one. When they went to her door, they says, we have a shoe. Somebody lost a shoe. And the prince wants to know whose shoe this is. God is saying, you are the one. So what happens is they bring out the 2 daughters that they feel like should wear the shoe. See, no matter who they feel like could wear the shoe, God says you can't wear the shoe unless it fits. So what happens is, finally, when they try to squeeze, see, you can't squeeze your way in a place that God is not trying to bless you in. You can't squeeze your way into something that never was designed to fit you. You can't manipulate your way into something that God never set up for you. So what happens is he puts the shoe on the first sister. He says, no, this ain't the one. He puts the shoe on the second sister. No, she can't fit the shoe. Her feet is too big. Just like David, they said, do you got one more? And they said it couldn't be Cinderella. Couldn't be Cinderella. Because remember, Cinderella never crossed their mind. So Cinderella overhears that they're looking for somebody who can fit this shoe. And what she does is she comes out and the shoe fit her feet. God says, you the one. God says, I don't care if they try to wear the shoe. God says, if I didn't intend for it to fit, they can't wear it. So I want to encourage you all on tonight. God says, you're the one that I've been looking for. He says, you're the one that's been in the back of the line. He says, but remember my words said the last shall be first and the first shall be last. God says the roles are about to shift. He says, you may be at the back of the line and they have to go through the line and they have to say, is this the only one? And they have to keep moving until they say, do you have any more? And God says, when they get to the back of the line, God says, you the one I've been looking for. God says, the last is about to be first and the first is about to be last. The ones they thought the oil that was going to flow on. This not the one that I'm looking for. God says you are the one. So Y'all, with that being said, I just want to thank each and every one of you all on tonight. If y'all ever have, well, if y'all have time, go back and just read the story. It's First Samuel 16. It's when Saul was sent to anoint David. Saul started off on a rough patch because Samuel started off rough because he didn't want to let Saul go. But you don't realize God is trying to send you somewhere that's going to bless you. And not only bless you, it's going to bless a multitude of people once you just let go. So I encourage each and every one of you all on tonight. Um, Thank you so much for joining in. Ms. Gwen says, no matter how high your credentials are, what God has for you is for you, and can't no one else have it but you. That's right. Thank you so much, Relia. You welcome. Thank you so much, Ms. Gwen, for that comment. I appreciate each and every one of you all who took the time out to get on this live with me. Like I said, just to recap, is First Samuel 16. In your spare time, just go back and read it, how they may have overlooked you. You may have been the underdog. You may have been the black sheep. You may have not even been the chosen child in the family. You may have not been that favorite child. But God says, let them keep overlooking you because you the one. God says they just didn't know the oil that I was about to flow over your life. So with that being said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you all. Thursday, I'm gonna get on TikTok. If y'all can come over there on TikTok and hang with me, I would appreciate it so much. Y'all, I'm wrapping it up, but I just want to tell you, I feel David, and on so many levels, that sometimes in life we feel like we're overlooked, only to come to the wisdom and knowledge that God says you're not overlooked. He says you're the one. But God says at the right timing, he says the shoe that you're about to wear is gonna fit perfectly. You're not going to have to try to jam your way into it. You're not going to have to stretch your way into it. God says it's going to fit at the perfect time. And so I encourage each and every one of you all, go back to First Samuel 16, read it. Maybe you'll get more revelation out of it, because God, you ask God to give me revelation and wisdom, God will help you understand it. But I just want to encourage you, when they say they ain't looking for you, tell them God says, I'm the one. Even though you feel like I'm not qualified, I don't have a big platform, but I'm the one. When me and my husband was in ministry, and, you go to church and you do this and you do that, you get overlooked a lot, honestly, because you don't meet the criterias. Sometimes it's because of the place you grew up at. Sometimes it's because of you don't have the education that they think you should have. Sometimes they feel like you just not qualified. But God is saying, listen, you have to let go of that. And what they looking for, God says it's not what I'm looking for. God says, but from today forth, you tell them I'm the one. You tell them I'm qualified. I'm the one. You don't see the oil that God is about to pour on my life. But I'm saying from this day forward, I am the one. I am qualified to do what God has asked me to do, not because I qualified myself. Let's not forget, I didn't qualify myself, but I qualified because God says you are the one. So with that being said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you all. I appreciate each and every one of you who got on here with me tonight. I'll see you all if you can make it over there. It's still Real Talk with Frank and Vanessa on TikTok. I'm trying to build that. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Love and Truth on TikTok. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm new to it, but it's Love and Truth on TikTok. We're trying to build that platform up, as well as the YouTube platform and the Facebook platform. So invite somebody. If you can't make it, just tell them. Say, just go check them out. Just go check them out. I promise you, they not giving you their opinion. I didn't write this story. This story wasn't, I didn't write it, the Bible. This is what God has given me. So, with that being said, appreciate you, each and every one of you all on Thursday. If you can, on TikTok, come over there. I'll be over there on TikTok under Love and Truth at 7 o'clock, right? At 7 o'clock, y'all, and give my husband a hand. He's over here working these comments for me, and he sets everything up for me. So I truly, truly, truly thank him for that from the bottom of my heart. But with that being said, I'm gonna let you all go. It's 8:30. You all be blessed, and I'll see you on Thursday for more encouragement to tell you that God is looking for you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of Real Talk with Frank and Vanessa. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of our incredible community. Frank and Vanessa truly appreciate each and every one of you who has been supporting them on this journey. Your engagement, feedback, and love mean the world to them. Before they go, they want to give a special shout out to their amazing supporters. Your generosity keeps the conversations flowing and the episodes coming. If you enjoy what you hear and want to contribute to the continued success of Real Talk, consider making a donation. Every contribution, big or small, goes a long way in helping them bring you more thought-provoking content. You can show your support by sending your donations to their Cash App at $VANLUC. That's VANLUC. And for those using Zelle, you can contribute to loveandtruth034@gmail.com. Your support allows them to invest in better equipment, bring on exciting guests, and continue to deliver the real and unfiltered conversations you love. They're grateful for each contribution,